My parents kicked me out to give my room to my sister's baby, so I cut them off and watched them panic when they needed me most. I'm a 27-year-old guy who's always been the responsible one. I've quietly carried the weight of bills, late nights at work, and household chores, while my younger sister seemed to glide through life, praised for the tiniest things she did, smiling just right, saying the right joke, getting a participation ribbon in high school. Growing up, I was the invisible child. My parents never said much about the sacrifices I made, covering repairs, saving for my own car, helping with tuition. But they noticed every charm point my sister scored. "You're too serious sometimes," they'd remark, and "don't you relax a little?" would follow, as if my dedication were a flaw, rather than the backbone keeping everything running. Meanwhile, my sister basked in attention for things that barely required effort. I remember the day I finally moved into my own apartment. Carrying boxes up the stairs, the smell of fresh paint, and that faint carpet glue scent hit me like a reward after years of overlooked labor. The pride was intoxicating. For the first time, I felt like I had a space that was mine, a little fortress carved out of my effort and discipline. I could unpack without someone questioning my choices, without being compared to her. I remember dropping my keys onto the counter and just standing there, listening to the silence that finally felt earned. But even then, a subtle unease tugged at the back of my mind. My mom casually mentioned, "Well, we might need that room back eventually, for something important." I forced a smile, but the words lingered. My sister peeked over my shoulder, giggling at some new decoration I'd put up, oblivious to the tension underneath. I shrugged it off for now, convincing myself I was reading too much into it. But the seed was planted. That faint hint of, "soon, it won't be yours," sat like a shadow in my chest, and I didn't know it yet. But it was only the beginning of the frustration that would quietly, relentlessly build. Everything changed the day my sister announced she was pregnant. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a coffee and scrolling through bills, when she practically shouted it across the room. "Guess what? I'm having a baby." The news should have been exciting, but instead, my stomach twisted. My parents immediately jumped up, hugging her, cooing, and fussing over every tiny detail, like this was the most important thing that had ever happened. I smiled awkwardly, clapping and pretending to be happy, but inside, a cold pit of anxiety formed. Before I could even process, my dad said, "We'll need that room for the baby. You understand, right?" I froze mid-sip. Uh, the room? My room?" My voice sounded small, even to me. My mom nodded quickly. "It's temporary, of course, but the baby should have a proper space." My mind raced. Temporary. That word carried the weight of a lifetime of being overlooked. She looked at me with wide eyes, like I should be thrilled, like I should leap at the chance to give up everything I'd worked for. "It's okay, right? You have your own place now anyway," my mom added, trying to soften it. I nodded slowly, but the sting of betrayal was immediate. Years of responsibility, sacrifices no one noticed, all dismissed in a single sentence. I felt trapped between gratitude for my independence and the frustration of being undervalued. I could see the glow of excitement on my sister's face and the approval in my parents' eyes, and I realized something bitter. I had been invisible for so long that my life could be repurposed at their convenience. That evening, I lay in my new apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. But the words echoed in my head. "We need the room for the baby." I felt small, unseen, and angry, and I knew, somewhere deep down, that this was the first fracture in a relationship I had always thought was unbreakable. The tension wasn't going away. It was only getting started. I started packing my things the next day, trying to stay calm, though every box felt heavier than the last. I moved carefully, stacking my belongings neatly, but inside, I was anything but organized. Anger, disbelief, and frustration tangled together like a storm I couldn't control. I kept thinking about every time I'd covered my sister's mistakes, every bill I'd paid quietly, every favor I'd done without thanks. And now, years of sacrifice were being erased with the same casualness I'd grown up under. My parents hovered nearby, offering helpful advice in that thinly polite tone that always made me feel smaller. "Maybe don't take too much with you," my mom said, brushing her fingers over a pile of books I had saved since college. "It's just a few weeks until the baby moves in," my dad added, like I was overreacting by even unpacking the box I'd labeled mine. I forced a polite smile, but every word felt like a reminder that my life wasn't really mine. My sister appeared at the doorway, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Oh, you don't need all of that here anyway," It'll just get in the way. Her grin was innocent, or at least, that's how she wanted it to look, but it cut deeper than I expected. She didn't realize, or maybe didn't care, how much I had invested in that room, how it symbolized my independence, my little fortress in a family that always overlooked me. I paused, hands on the cardboard, breathing through the tightness in my chest. The apartment smelled faintly of cardboard and furniture polish, sterile and cold compared to the warmth I once felt in my childhood home. I kept my voice steady, but my heart raced. Yeah, sure. I guess it won't be a big deal, I said, and I knew I was lying. To them, and to myself. By the time I left, the boxes were packed, the walls empty, and a hollow sense of betrayal lingered in the air. I locked the door behind me and took a long breath outside, the street quiet, the city moving on as if my life was invisible. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a room anymore. It was the first real fracture, and I had no idea how far it would go. Once I left, I didn't look back. I blocked my parents on social media, muted group chats, and avoided their calls, telling myself I needed space to think. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger, the freedom to breathe without being dismissed, and the bitter realization that my family had treated me like I didn't matter. Walking down the quiet streets to my apartment, the cool air stung my cheeks, and I realized how heavy the weight of invisibility had been. I had carried it for so long, I barely noticed until it was gone. My parents' reaction was, predictably, underwhelming. I heard through mutual friends that they were calling each other, whispering about how dramatic I was being, and how I'll come around eventually. My sister didn't seem fazed either. She was too caught up in decorating her nursery, oblivious to the fracture she'd caused. It stung worse than I expected, realizing that the people I'd sacrificed everything for didn't see my absence as anything serious. At night, I lay on my couch, listening to the hum of the city outside my window. The smell of coffee from the cafe downstairs and the faint scent of laundry from my new apartment were oddly comforting, a reminder that this was my space, my rules. But every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, anticipating a message from them that might demand I bend again. The unease in my chest didn't leave. I started to notice something strange, small gaps in their routines that I used to fill. The dishes piled up longer than usual at my parents' house, appointments were forgotten, and minor crises seemed to escalate without my steady hand. I wasn't there, and suddenly, the foundation I'd been propping up for years was cracking. I felt a surge of satisfaction and guilt at the same time. For the first time, I realized just how much they relied on me, and it made me wonder, what would happen if I never returned? The thought lingered, bitter and sweet, like a storm waiting to break. A few weeks passed, and the cracks in my parents' perfect little world started showing in ways I couldn't ignore. Every phone call I ignored, every text I left unanswered, seemed to push them further into chaos. My parents had always relied on me for logistics, remembering appointments, paying bills on time, keeping everything running smoothly. Without me, nothing worked the way it should. I started hearing through neighbors and friends that my mom had burned dinner twice in a row. My dad had forgotten to pick up prescriptions, and my sister's schedule was unraveling because she had no one to organize it for. I won't lie. I felt a quiet satisfaction hearing these reports. After years of being invisible, being taken for granted, suddenly they were the ones scrambling. But it wasn't just vindication. There was a pang of guilt buried under the relief. I remembered the nights I stayed up helping them through crises, the arguments I smoothed over, the emergencies I handled while they praised my sister for, what? A smile, a kind word, a nap? Then came the moment that really hit me. My dad called me one evening, voice strained. We're struggling without you. Can you come help for a bit? There it was, desperation dripping through the line. My stomach turned. I wanted to hang up, wanted to tell him to deal with it, but a small, stubborn part of me hesitated. And then, my sister got involved, texting me. Please, this is getting out of control. Mom and Dad can't manage. I didn't think it would be this bad. Her tone was panicked, pleading, and just like that, the stakes shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't about a room anymore. It was about them realizing what they'd lost. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, the city lights flickering outside my window, heart pounding. I realized just how much control I'd had all these years, quietly giving them everything while being treated as invisible. And now, for the first time, the power was in my hands. The question was, what would I do with it? I stared at my phone for what felt like hours, reading my dad's desperate texts over and over. We can't manage without you. Please, come help. I could hear the panic in his words, the quiet desperation that had never surfaced when I was standing right there, doing everything for them. Part of me wanted to drop everything, rush over, and be the dependable son again. Another, louder part screamed at me to stay put, to finally let them face the consequences of years of taking me for granted. My sister called, her voice shaking. I didn't think it would get this bad. Mom and Dad are falling apart. I don't know what to do. I could hear a hint of fear behind her words, the realization that I had been the invisible glue holding their world together. And for the first time, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't brushing over her mistakes. She was scared. That scared little feeling inside me mixed with years of resentment. I paced around my apartment, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The faint smell of leftover takeout and my unwashed laundry reminded me this was my space, my rules, my life. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made for them, the money I'd spent, the emergencies I'd solved, the nights I stayed awake while my sister cooed in comfort, and realized just how much power I'd been quietly holding. Finally, I answered. Not to rush back or fix everything, not to let them control me again. I said slowly, deliberately, I can't come over. You'll have to manage this yourselves. Silence. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the first time, I felt it. Fear, respect, and clarity all rolled into one. The storm was coming, and I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up after it. But as I hung up, I felt a strange mix of guilt and satisfaction. This was my first real step toward independence, and toward making them understand, finally, that I was no longer invisible. After that call, everything changed. I could feel the shift in power, like the invisible strings I'd been pulling for years were finally in my hands. My parents had spent decades relying on me for every little thing, and now, for the first time, they were fumbling without me. I started noticing the small cracks in their daily routines. Appointments missed, groceries forgotten, bills late. Each little failure was a silent confirmation that I had been carrying the weight all along. And suddenly, the idea of helping them immediately felt unnecessary. My sister called again, this time more desperate. You have to help. Mom can't figure out the bills. Dad keeps arguing over stupid things, and I can't take care of the baby and everything else. Her voice cracked, pleading. But I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring out my window at the city lights reflecting off the wet streets, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. It was surreal. Years of sacrifice, invisibility, and control finally inverted, and I could watch it happen from a safe distance. I thought back to the countless times I had stayed up late, quietly fixing their mistakes, solving problems they didn't even acknowledge, while my sister was praised for showing up once in a while. The memory stung, but it also fueled a cold clarity. I wasn't going to be manipulated or guilted into returning to that role. Later, I did answer her, but on my terms. I can give advice over the phone, I said, keeping my voice calm and measured. But I'm not coming over. You all need to manage this yourselves. Silence on the other end. I imagined the panic, the frustration, the disbelief. They had spent years thinking I would always step in, and now that assumption had been shattered. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the faint hum of traffic outside, and for the first time, I felt real control. I wasn't just the invisible son anymore. I was finally in charge of my life. But even as I felt that power, I knew the tension was far from over. It didn't take long for the panic to hit full force. My parents were scrambling in ways I'd only ever seen me handle before, and now they were helpless. I heard through a friend that my mom had forgotten to pay the electric bill, my dad was arguing with the cable company, and my sister had missed a doctor's appointment for the baby. Normally, I would have swooped in, quietly fixing everything, smoothing tensions, and calming arguments. Now, none of that was happening, and I felt a strange, intoxicating mix of satisfaction and guilt watching it unfold. The first time my phone rang with a frantic call from my dad, I could hear the panic immediately. We can't manage this. Can you please come? He stammered, voice shaky and strained. I sat back on my couch, the hum of the city outside my window blending with the rapid beating of my heart. I wanted to answer yes, to rush to their side as I always had, but something inside me held me back. Years of being invisible, of being treated as if my efforts were nothing, made it impossible. Then my sister called, and the desperation in her voice made it even clearer. Please, just come. You don't understand. We're drowning here. I could hear her sobbing, and it should have tugged at me, but all I felt was the quiet power of choice. I had spent years giving them everything, and now I could choose whether or not they deserved it. I paced my apartment, the faint scent of coffee from earlier still lingering, and thought about every time they had dismissed me, every time they praised her for things I had done behind the scenes. My chest tightened with both rage and clarity. For the first time, the control wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. As I hung up, I realized that everything had shifted. The family that had relied on me without acknowledgement was now exposed, vulnerable, and frantic. And I, for the first time in my life, could watch without stepping in, at least for now. The real turning point came when my extended family got involved. I had always been the one quietly holding everything together, smoothing over arguments, reminding everyone of schedules, and paying attention to details no one else noticed. But now, without me, my parents were exposed, and the humiliation was public. Cousins, aunts, and uncles started commenting, asking why my mom hadn't managed the bills, why my dad kept forgetting appointments, and why my sister seemed overwhelmed beyond reason. Their faces twisted in polite concern, but I could feel the sting. They finally realized how much they had relied on me. I sat back in my apartment, listening to the updates from a friend who had attended a small family gathering. My parents were red-faced, flustered, and panicked, fumbling through explanations. My sister's smile had vanished, replaced with a tight, uneasy expression. The baby was crying in the background, and suddenly, their carefully curated image of competence was crumbling in front of everyone. I felt a mix of vindication and disbelief. Years of invisible labor, finally recognized, though indirectly, and through the chaos, I had refrained from stopping. Later, my dad called me, his voice hesitant, shaky. We didn't realize how much we relied on you. Can we fix this? The guilt pang hit me, sharp and heavy, but I refused to give in entirely. I thought about all the nights I stayed up, solving their crises quietly, and realized I didn't owe them a repeat performance. My sister sent a message, apologizing for underestimating me, for expecting me to always be there. I sat in silence for a moment, the faint hum of traffic outside blending with the distant cries of the city. I realized something profound. The power had finally shifted. They were finally seeing me as a person, not just a tool. But even as I acknowledged the shift, a small part of me feared they wouldn't truly change. I knew the next move would decide everything. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive, or if I even wanted to. I decided it was time to step in, but only on my terms. For years, I had been the invisible son, expected to solve every problem without thanks, without recognition, without boundaries. Now, the rules had changed. I helped selectively, guiding over the phone, offering advice, rather than doing everything for them. Each suggestion was deliberate, each piece of guidance given in a way that reminded them I wasn't their safety net anymore. The first time I spoke to my mom after the chaos, she sounded frazzled. We don't know what to do, she admitted. I calmly explained what she needed to handle first, prioritizing bills and appointments, but I refused to get into the role of caretaker. My dad tried to interject, a tinge of frustration in his voice. Why don't you just come over? I smiled slightly, letting the silence speak louder than words. Because I'm not here to fix everything. You can manage this yourselves. Even my sister was starting to understand. Her text became less pleading and more tentative. I didn't realize how much you handled before, she said. It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had ever received from her, and for once, I didn't feel invisible. She was finally seeing the consequences of her dependence, and it was strangely satisfying. I walked through my apartment, the faint aroma of takeout lingering, the city lights reflecting off the windows. I felt a sense of control I'd never experienced before, a mix of empowerment and quiet vindication. The house they had counted on me to run smoothly was now fully exposed, yet I wasn't overstepping. This wasn't revenge in the explosive sense. It was subtle, a shift in balance they couldn't ignore. That night, I looked at my phone and didn't respond to a message from my dad. For the first time, they had to experience life without me as a crutch. And as I settled into my apartment, the quiet hum of the city around me, I realized something powerful. I was no longer invisible, and the family that had once dismissed me was finally learning what it meant to rely on themselves. Finally, I knew it was time for a real conversation, one where I stopped being invisible and spoke my truth. I called my parents, and for the first time, I let them hear all the years of frustration, the sacrifices they had overlooked, the countless nights I stayed up fixing problems no one acknowledged. Do you have any idea how it felt to be treated like nothing I did mattered? I asked, my voice shaking but firm. My dad went silent, and I could hear my mom exhaling on the other end, realizing that the obedient son they had dismissed was finally speaking. I recounted everything: paying bills, covering emergencies, handling conflicts, supporting my sister when she failed to step up. I've been invisible for so long, and now you're scrambling because you've relied on me for too many things. You made your choices, and now it's on you to manage, I said. Their silence was deafening, the weight of accountability finally landing. Then my sister joined the call, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't realize how much you did, she admitted. I just assumed you'd always be there. Hearing her acknowledgement was surreal, like a punch of validation I had longed for but never expected. I let her words hang in the air, letting her feel the weight of her dependence. I explained my boundaries clearly. I would help in ways that respected my time and energy, but I was no longer the default problem solver. They had to learn to navigate life without me carrying every burden. My parents' voices wavered between shame, surprise, and reluctant understanding, realizing that I had grown beyond their control. As I hung up, the apartment was quiet, the faint hum of the city outside matching the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. For the first time, I felt truly empowered. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't stormed out in anger. I had shifted the power quietly, effectively, and irrevocably. And deep down, I knew they'd never take me for granted the same way again. Months have passed since I finally drew the line, and my life has transformed in ways I never imagined. For the first time, I feel respected, seen, and in control. Not just in my apartment, but in my own mind. My parents, humbled and finally aware of how much they relied on me, have begun adjusting. They still call occasionally, but the tone has changed. No longer pleading, no longer assuming I'll bail them out. My sister has grown too, taking real responsibility for her baby and the life around her. It's strange, almost surreal, to watch them navigate challenges I used to fix for them and realize I don't have to intervene. I remember the long nights of frustration, the invisible labor, the feeling of being overlooked while my sister was praised for doing almost nothing. Those memories sting, but they also remind me of how far I've come. I finally understand that loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself endlessly, and love doesn't require invisibility. I have built my own life with boundaries and respect, and for the first time, I can enjoy it without guilt. The ironic twist is the quiet satisfaction I feel whenever I hear about a minor crisis handled poorly without me. My parents and sister have learned that life isn't effortless, that my help came at a cost, and that taking me for granted has consequences. I don't gloat openly, but there's a sweet, subtle victory in knowing they now appreciate me in ways they never did before. I still visit occasionally, carefully, on my own terms. The apartment smells of clean laundry and fresh coffee, the city lights reflecting off the windows, and I feel peace. I've finally stepped out of the shadows, claiming my life, my independence, and my self-respect. The invisible son no longer exists. In his place stands someone they must recognize, someone who will never be taken for granted again.